Going into our last topic of the day, we're going to talk about the AFC North. We did the Jets division with the AFC East last episode. We're going to go into AFC North. So the AFC North teams, just if anybody doesn't know, we got the Ravens, the Steelers, the Browns, and we have the Bengals. So going into this division a little bit, the Ravens coming off of a division title last year. They were also the number one seed in the AFC last year. They had a 14-2 record. So before I go into it, I'll let Sam kind of go into it. But the divisions that these teams will mainly play will be the NFC East. Obviously, you got the Cowboys and other teams like that in the AFC or the NFC East. Confusing that the Cowboys are in the Eastern division, but that's besides the point. And then they're also going to play the AFC South. So in the AFC South, you have the Jags, the Colts, the Texans, the Titans.
Yeah, I think the Ravens are going to come out on top this season in their division. They have a great roster. They have one of the best rosters in the whole NFL, and they have one of the easiest schedules in the whole NFL.
Yep.
I can see them going 14-2 again, or even going 15-1. 16-0, I don't think they'll be able to go 16-0. Obviously, it's just so competitive. Football is just so competitive now, and there's so many great teams. I don't think they'll be able to do a 16-0 season, but I can see them having one of the best regular season records in the whole NFL. But I think the storyline looking at this division are the Browns and the Steelers.
Yeah.
The Steelers were very good last year. They didn't make the playoffs, but they're on the brink of making the playoffs. Subpar quarterback play with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph, but having someone like Ben Roethlisberger back and then adding depth at wide receiver with Chase Claypool in the second round, I think they can really make a run for money to being a wild card team. And then obviously the Browns, they have a fantastic roster, but their offensive line kind of really hurt them last year. So adding someone like Jack Conklin from the Tennessee Titans and drafting Jedrick Wills, they're really beefing up the offensive line to protect Baker and allow more running holes for Nick Chubb. So I think it's going to be a really heavyweight battle between the Browns and the Steelers, and those matchups with those two teams are going to be extremely important next year.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, in lieu of this new NFL contract where 3 teams are going to be able to grab a wild card spot instead of 2, I really do strongly believe that the Steelers and the Browns could potentially grab that wild card spot. But before I kind of go into my predictions, I'm going to kind of overview this offseason for each of these teams a little bit. The Ravens, looking at them a little bit closer, they do make me a bit nervous because they do have a 14-2 record. I mean, they opened up the season with 59 points against the Dolphins, right? But they did beat the Seahawks and 49ers last year, but had a very close game with the Cardinals. They lost to the Chiefs and they lost to the Browns. And obviously they had a very poor showing in the divisional round of the playoffs. I mean, and so I think they traded Hayden Hurst. So I think the lack of weapons this team does have on offense, obviously you have Lamar Jackson, MVP Lamar Jackson, and they did add J.K. Dobbins, but I think they were kind of exposed with their lack of separation skills from their wide receivers last year. So if they can, or if NFL teams could follow the blueprints that the Titans defense laid out last year in terms of playing man-to-man coverage with these wide receivers who really just can't get open. You have Hollywood Brown, who could potentially break out next year. He's going to be tough. But again, if Hollywood Brown doesn't have the season that people expect him to, if you could just have your best cornerback on Hollywood Brown, play them on an island and be good, I think this team is potentially going to see a worse record than 14-2 next year. I don't think they're going to go 14-2 next year just because I think more and more NFL teams are going to start stacking the box and realizing that this team really doesn't have any weapons outside of potentially J.K. Dobbins, Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram, and I mean, obviously they have a very good tight end room still without Hayden Hurst, but they do have some separation skills. So that does make me a little bit nervous about the Ravens. Now, Marshall Yanda did retire, who is their best offensive lineman, which I think is going to hurt them a little bit. But they did get Calais Campbell, who is very good still. They got Derek Wolfe, who is still very good. They added to their linebacking room to get Jake Ryan, and they did re-sign most of their team. They did get Patrick Queen, one of my favorite players in the entire NFL draft this season. So I do think the Ravens are still going to be contenders for the number 1 seed in the AFC next year.
Yeah, I mean, their offense might struggle at some points with teams figuring them out, but I think their defense is really going to step up and win them a lot of football games to just how many great players they have on the defense side of the football.
Yeah, certainly. And getting into, again, the most intriguing teams, in my opinion, in this division, the Steelers and the Browns now, I think the Ravens are a bit of a lock for the playoffs at this point, and I do think they're going to win the division. But, again, like you said, the Steelers are coming off an 8-8 season. They made a playoff push all year with Ben Roethlisberger out. And, I mean, you said subpar quarterback play. I think that's a bit generous. I would say borderline horrible quarterback play from Mason Rudolph and Devlin Duck Hodges. I mean, they lost some offensive line depth and some defensive players, but really no key starters. They lost our boy Tyler Medikevich from St. Joe's, but besides that, they did sign Eric Ebron. They did sign a couple players from the XFL. I saw they're probably going to be depth players. They did restructure some contracts, such as Big Ben's and Joe Hayden's. But again, the Steelers, if they have even below average quarterback play from Ben Roethlisberger this season, which I do think is going to be the case, I think Ben Roethlisberger is kind of just hanging on for dear life in terms of his NFL career at this point. I would not be surprised to see Ben Roethlisberger get injured yet again this season, possibly sign Cam Newton at some point in the offseason. Every single time there's been a quarterback free agent rumor, I've always pushed for the Steelers because I do think Ben Roethlisberger is on his way out, and I don't like their backup room and their quarterback room with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. So I certainly do think the Steelers are going to make the playoffs next season if they just get subpar to average quarterback play from Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, I mean, their defense, like I said with the Ravens, the Steelers' defense is also very good last year.
Yep.
They had Mika Fitzpatrick for not the whole season because they got him via trade, but even he was a kind of an MVP candidate the short stint that he was on the Steelers for. So if he's able to play a full season, or they get him for a full season, he can really become a fantastic leader for their defense and kind of help their defense can win some games if they have lacking quarterback play with Ben Roethlisberger.
Certainly, we saw that so many times last year where they had really bad offensive showings, but the defense just carried them to a win. Another player who didn't start off the season with the Steelers, he did, but he was a backup. They kind of made him earn his role to the starting position, and that's Devin Bush, their first-round pick, not this year, but last year. And he was one of the best rookies last year in the entire NFL, in my opinion. I mean, he just played absolutely outstanding at that middle linebacker to rover position. So Devin Bush, he's going to lead that defense for years. So again, the Steelers, I do believe the Steelers are going to make the playoffs. I would put my money on the Steelers making the playoffs just because they came off an 8-8 season last year with, again, Ben Roethlisberger out all year. So if Ben Roethlisberger could play this year, or they can just have average quarterback play from him, I certainly do think the Steelers will make the playoffs. But going into the Browns a little bit, I mean, they're coming off of an extremely hyped up yet disastrous and disappointing season. They led the league in penalties. Odell was hurt. Baker Mayfield regressed. Kareem Hunt really didn't do anything. Freddie Kitchens, their head coach, was flat out horrible. And I mean, they were 6-10, so the Browns certainly are going to look back to bounce back this season. And you kind of got into some of their free agency signings. They did sign Kareem Hunt into another year. They signed Case Keenum, one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league, to a 3-year deal. They got the fullback from the Broncos, Andy Janovich. They signed Austin Hooper, one of the best tight ends in the league. Again, a tackle in Jack Conklin. They increased the offensive line and some of their depth in the NFL draft. They did lose Joe Schober, who I do think is a very underrated, really good linebacker in today's NFL, and Christian Kirksey, another linebacker. So I do think that linebacking core for the Browns is going to be a bit concerning going into the season. But again, I really do think this is the Browns' year to kind of put it all together. And if they don't, I don't know if they ever will. And I really do say that just because of Kevin Stefanski, their new head coach. He's coming off of being the offensive coordinator for the Vikings, and he's just a perfect scheme and personnel fit. He loves to run the ball. They're going to run the ball with who PFF had as the best running back in the league last year in Nick Chubb, and they're going to kind of work from that play action, get Baker Mayfield some easy completion. So I do think with the addition of Kevin Stefanski to their coaching staff, I do think this is going to be a good year for the Browns, and I do think they could kind of just contend for the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, last year the Browns had so much hype around them, and they had a lot of primetime games and big ticket games, and they kind of crumbled under that pressure. But this year, having the pressure off of them, or they still have pressure on them to perform, but having kind of not national spotlight on them, I think they'll be able to kind of take a deep breath and perform a lot better than they did last year.
Certainly, and they're certainly going to be expected to. Now, they did fire their GM as well. They kind of cleaned house, so the time is ticking on Baker Mayfield. I know he's had a very short 3-year stint in the NFL and on the Browns thus far, but whenever there's a regime change in terms of just front office with a new quarterback, the new regime is never pressured to keep this quarterback because they didn't draft this quarterback. They didn't bring this guy in. So Baker Mayfield, he's certainly going to be expected to play well this season because they did sign Case Keenum for a reason. Kevin Stefanski did great with Case Keenum. So I wouldn't be surprised to see at some point this season, if Baker Mayfield is just playing absolutely horrible, but the rest of the team is playing good, to switch to Case Keenum. And that would be obviously a huge move. But getting into the last team in this division, I think everybody, including us, have kind of ignored them thus far, and that's been the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, they have had one of their most significant off seasons in a while just because they did draft Joe Burrow, one of the best seasons in college football history, obviously a historic season with the LSU Tigers, but they're coming off of a 2-win season with Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor is a very young, unproven head coach, and they didn't really do anything in the offseason besides get Joe Burrow. They also got Higgins from Clemson. The draft, in the second round, but they added DJ Reader, Trey Waynes, and they did franchise tag AJ Green. So they really didn't do anything in the division. I think the Bengals are going to win around 4 to 5 games this next season, but this is just going to be another rebuilding year for them, and it's really going to be how Joe Burrow does and what Joe Burrow could do on this team.
Yeah, I mean, they have some weapons around Joe Burrow. They have AJ Green, T. Higgins. They have Joe Mixon. They have the still unproven John Ross, who I think he can really step up this year and perform well if he's healthy. But it's just a bad luck of the draw for Joe Burrow being in this division with having 2 really good defenses with the Ravens and the Steelers, and then obviously the Browns have a pretty average or above average defense. I know they're lacking at some spots, but it's a hard-hitting division. I know a lot of people call this the black and blue division, and it's gonna be hard for a young quarterback to just be his welcome to the NFL playing these teams.
Certainly, I think playing in the NFC North or the AFC North, we're talking about the AFC North here. I think those are the 2 toughest divisions in terms of just environment to play in, not necessarily in terms of teams, because I don't think either of the North divisions are the best in terms of teams, but in terms of just kind of environment, they all play outside mainly. It gets very cold very quickly in the NFL for these teams that play in these divisions. And again, these teams really do hate each other. We still see huge rivalries between teams, even if they aren't good. The Bengals obviously have a very big rivalry with the Steelers, and I think we're going to see that kind of rejuvenated with Joe Burrow kind of leading this team. So certainly a big welcome to the NFL for Joe Burrow playing in this tough division, but really excited to see Bengal football next year just because of Joe Burrow, really.
Yeah, so I think just obviously we're going to both have the Ravens at number 1, and then 2 and 3, I think it's going to fluctuate between the Steelers and Browns. I'm leaning more towards the Steelers. What do you think?
Yeah, me too. I'm going to say the Steelers are probably going to end up with the 2nd seed, but I would not be surprised to see the Browns win 10 games this season. Certainly not.
And then obviously the Bengals coming in last. That's it. Thank you everybody for watching. We hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.